In today's lens review, I'm going to be reviewing a legendary lens, and a lens that's coined the name the Bokeh King in some photography circles. That is the Sigma 105mm f1.4 Art. And in today's video, I'll explain why this lens here is the best lens you should never own. And I'm gonna start right now. Announced back in June of 2018, this is Sigma's widest aperture telephoto zoom lens, offering an amazing aperture of f1.4 with a crazy 105mm focal range, beating out the 85mm and 135mm in both aperture and focal range. But is it any good? And is it worth buying over an 85mm prime lens or even a 135mm prime lens? There's not a lot of 105mm out there. So let's find out why. So first up, let's talk about the overall build quality, lens design, as well as what you get inside the box. Now, something I love from Sigma lenses, especially their Art series line, is the build quality. I genuinely think it's best in its class, even when we compare it to Canon native lenses and other third-party brands like, for example, Tokina or even Tamron. It really has amazing build quality. A full metal construction, a metal lens mount, plus this Art series lens actually has weather sealing thanks to its weather sealing gasket at the back. So if you're someone that shoots a little bit outdoors, it's actually a really good lens for you. It's not essential to have weather sealing on a portrait lens, but I've got to say, it's really nice to see that they've actually added it to this lens. Now on the side of the lens, you've got an autofocus to manual focus switch. And on the front of the lens, you've also got a focus window. Plus, you've also got, due to the overall size and weight of this lens, you've actually got a tripod collar. So instead of attaching it to the tripod via your camera, which could actually damage the lens mount because of how heavy this lens is, you can actually attach it directly to a tripod thanks to the tripod collar. It is removable, but it is a little bit fiddly, and to be honest with you, I've just kept it on for the length of me reviewing this lens. Now this lens actually has quite a complicated optical formula with 17 elements in 12 groups, with by far the largest filter thread I've genuinely seen, with a giant 105mm filter thread. So yeah, there's nothing small about this lens here. So what do you get inside the box? Well, actually, you get a surprising amount of accessories and good quality accessories as well. So firstly, you get this really nice lens pouch. Now, I love Sigma Art Series lens pouches. They offer this nice padding to them. I'm pretty sure it's a waterproof material, although I haven't obviously tested that. And then you've got this nice zipper and you've got nice padding inside. And inside, you also get a really nice, incredibly well-made lens hood. You've got this kind of rubbery material on the front. It's a full plastic one, but obviously due to the size of this lens, it's actually done, you tighten it up via this knob. So you place it over the lens itself and you kind of tighten it up by just twisting this knob. It isn't a lock-in one, so it's a little bit more secure than other kind of lens hoods that you may have used. Although obviously it does make this lens even larger. I'm not really sure how that is possible. And then lastly, you obviously get the dinner plate of a lens cap. You obviously get a front and rear lens cap. There is no kind of fabric lens cap with this one. You get the plastic one and it is absolutely massive. So overall, the accessories are incredibly well made. The build quality of this lens is absolutely exceptional. You get great build quality, weather sealing, full metal construction, and a tripod collar, all for cheaper than most Canon RF lenses. So as you can see, the build quality is exceptional. And because of that, got to give it the full marks, the 10 out of 10. Next up, let's have a look at the overall image quality. And this is where this lens is kind of unique in the market. There's not really another lens like it. And that's because of its aperture to focal length. Usually you'd get an 85mm or 135mm, and usually it's either f1.4 or f2. But this lens kind of sits in a happy middle, a little bit more telephoto than 85mm, but brighter than 135mm. So you're getting kind of the benefits of both lenses, brightness and also focal range, giving you amazing background separation. Coin the term the Bokeh Master, and you can really see why. That foreground and background separation is just not possible unless you do a little bit of post-production work. Now, I took this lens on a rustic horse photo shoot, and I was really happy with the images. I really like the colors, the sharpness, and just that background separation is just so beautiful. That kind of bokeh that it achieves is just really nice. It renders that background really nicely. But how sharp is this lens? Let's have a look at a few graph images. Okay, let's go ahead and take a photo at 105mm at f1.4 with corrections and peripheral illuminations turned off. Now if we go ahead and zoom into the center and the corners, we can see we're getting really good sharpness in the center, really almost pin sharp at f1.4. Now if we go have a look at some corners, they're not as good, but they're still really impressive wide open at f1.4. Now we can sharpen them up by stepping down to f2, and then they're really sharp at f2.8. I'd say as sharp as the center. And it's the same situation with f4, f5.6, and f8. Now f11, this starts to soften up a little bit just due to diffraction, and both the center and the corners are quite soft at f16. So really impressive, really sharp wide open at f1.4, but to get amazing image sharpness, definitely step down to either f2 or 2.8. And next up, let's have a look at distortion and vignetting, and wow, really good, almost no distortion to be seen, which I must say I was kind of expecting. Usually telephoto lenses, especially prime lenses, don't have much distortion. There's a mild amount of pincushion distortion, but it is incredibly subtle. You're definitely not going to notice that, with a small amount of vignetting. Now we can push that vignetting to the corners at f2, and there's basically no vignetting at f2.8, and it's the same situation with f4 and f5.6. So as you can see, a really impressive score with distortion and vignetting, but a small amount of vignetting wide open at f1.4. Next up, let's have a look at its macro ability. And I've got to admit, it hasn't got great macro score. In fact, you don't want to get muddled up and buy the 105mm f2.8 macro, because that's a far better macro lens, and it's actually got the same focal range. But this lens here has got a minimum focus distance of just 1 meter, which means it's got a maximum reproduction ratio of 0.12, which is definitely under average for an 85mm or 135mm prime lens, which usually has a macro ratio of 0.2. So it's a little bit under average for a prime lens. And if you actually have a look at its image quality, it's not great at its minimum focus distance, especially at wide open at f1.4. Now we can improve that by stepping down to f2 and f2.8, but yeah, it definitely hasn't got the greatest macro ability with a fairly rubbish minimum focus distance. And lastly, let's have a look at flaring, and yeah, not very good. But to be honest with you, I wasn't expecting it to be very good. It has a giant 105mm front element, plus it's got quite a complicated optical formula, which means there's a lot of lens elements to bounce around light, causing a lot of flaring and a reduction in contrast. You've got very strong flaring elements, although they're not very, very strong. They're more of a softer, just simply reduction in contrast, but they do cover a large portion of the image frame. So if you are pointing towards bright lights, highly recommend using the lens hood to increase contrast, which luckily you do get inside the box. So as you can see, you're getting absolute exquisite image quality with this lens. And it really offers you something that no other lens can offer you, that background separation. Sure, you can get close with an 85mm or 135mm, but this lens here just offers you that little bit extra that no other lens can offer you. Hence the name, or it's been coined the name, the Bokeh King. It really is the king of background separation. And with a fairly good sharpness, especially in the corners at f1.4, basically no distortion and vignetting, or there's a small amount of vignetting wide open at f1.4, nothing that profile correction can fix. The only thing that's not great is its minimum focus distance, but again, it's not really designed for that. It's definitely not a macro lens, and not to be confused with the other macro lens, and the flaring isn't very good, but of course it isn't. Have you seen that front element? But ignoring that, image quality wise, loved it. I wish I actually might buy this lens because of it. I really, really liked it. And because of that, I'm giving it the full marks, the 10 out of 10. It really is the king of bokeh. Next up, size and weight. Big problem, really, really big problem. I've used this for about a week and a half now, and it is, as you can see, a big problem if you pardon the pun. Now, it might not seem massive in your hand, but if we compare it to a similar lens, although it's not exactly the same, this is my EF, or Canon EF 85mm f1.4, we put them next to each other, you can really see the problem. It is massive, and also really, really heavy as well. And if we take that front element, buying a filter for this lens is going to actually be a really big challenge. This lens here, my 85mm, has got a 77mm filter thread, readily available, really easy to find, both UV, NDs, and even circular polarizers. But actually, I've looked on the market and I've really struggled to find 105mm. There are definitely a few out there. Actually, Sigma do a really good UV one, but they are very, very expensive. But let's compare it to a few other lenses to really see how truly big this lens is. So firstly, let's have a look at the Sigma 105mm f1.4. This lens here comes in at 1.65 kilos. Then we can compare it to the Sigma 85mm f1.4, similar but not exactly the same. That lens there comes in at 1.13 kilos. Then we can compare it to the Sigma 135mm f1.8. Again, a little bit more telephoto, but not as bright as this lens here. And that lens there comes in exactly the same, 1.13 kilos. And then lastly, compare it to the lens we just looked at. This is my Canon EF 85mm f1.4L IS. This lens has image stabilization and this lens doesn't. And that lens comes in at 950 grams. And if we have a look at the size chart here, the 105mm monsters over the rest. And you've also got to think, it comes with a tripod collar. So when it fits in your bag, sure, it might not look big that way, but actually fitting it in your bag is also a challenge as well. So because of that, I'm only going to giving it a 2 out of 10. Next up, autofocus, image stabilization, and what this lens was like for video. Now, autofocus, it uses a HSM or hypersonic focus motor, and it's just as reliable and just as fast as any other Canon or Sigma lens I have used. Now, the ultrasonic focus motors you get in Canon are probably a little bit faster and maybe a little bit more reliable, but maybe by 2 to 5%, not something you're ever really going to notice. I never really had any problems with autofocus issues with this lens. Sure, it's not the fastest I've ever used, especially when you compare it to other Canon ones, but it is more than enough reliable for weddings, portraits, landscapes, and even if you wanted to photograph horses, that's what I did with it, and it nailed the focus almost every single time. So if you're worried about the autofocus, no need to worry about it. Image stabilization, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It doesn't actually have image stabilization. Now, there's only a few lenses within this focal range that do. One of them is obviously my Canon EF 85mm f1.4 LIS, but it's a little bit more expensive and doesn't obviously give you that background separation. So image stabilization, I'm not going to give it a major ding because, to be honest with you, most Sigma Art Series lenses don't have image stabilization. So because of that, I'm going to give it not the full marks, but I'm going to give it a solid 8 out of 10 for video. And last but not least is price. How well is this lens priced versus other Sigma and Canon lenses on the market? Let's firstly have a look at this lens here. So firstly, the Sigma 105mm f1.4 Art comes in brand new at £1,299. And used, if we go ahead and look at the MPB website, we can find them between £900 to £1,100 secondhand in reasonable condition. So you can see it actually holds its value quite well. And I think that's because it's a bit more of a niche, more of a unique lens on the market. Then we compare it to the Sigma 85mm f1.4 Art. That lens there comes in at £999 brand new, basically £1,000, and secondhand, far less, between £400 to £600, again in reasonable condition. So if you're more budget orientated, that 85mm secondhand is actually really good value for money. Then we can compare it to the Sigma 135mm f1.8 Art. That lens there comes in at £1,199 brand new, and secondhand comes in at around £500 to £700, again in reasonable condition. And lastly, we can compare it to my lens here, the Canon EF 85mm f1.4 LIS USM. And that lens there comes in at the most at £1,719, and secondhand in reasonable condition, you should be able to find it between £700 to £1,000. So actually, this is, if you ignore the Canon, the most expensive Sigma Art Series Prime that you can buy. And that's because it offers you that unique quality of 105mm with an f1.4 aperture. So you just have it's a toss-up really between those three lenses. Personally, I'd probably buy an 85mm. Smaller, lighter, and by far the best value for money. But if you're after that unique look, this is the only lens that can offer you it. I wouldn't actually say it's bad value for money, and actually pretty good in the grand scheme of things, but quite expensive for an Art Series or Sigma Art Series Prime lens. So because of that, I'm only giving it a 6 out of 10, but still good value for money. It's that time of the video where we look at the pros and cons to really summarize this video and to really work out, is this lens worth a spot in your camera bag? Let's have a look at the pros first. You're getting great build quality, and I can say that with every Sigma Art Series lens. I love the build quality, full metal construction, plus the big added bonus of weather sealing. You're getting incredible sharp images and corner to corner sharpness. If you step down to f2 to 2.8, you're getting razor sharp images and as good as some more expensive Canon RF lenses. You're also getting amazing background separation. It truly is the Bokeh King and the best lens on the market for background separation. You're also getting a really flat profile with this lens with very little distortion and vignetting. 105mm is incredibly flattering for portrait photography. And although it's one of Sigma's most expensive prime lenses, compared to Canon, it's incredibly good value for money. So as you can see, there's a decent amount of pros, but let's have a look at the cons on why maybe another lens is worth a spot in your camera bag. It's really big. There's no way of getting around it. With a filter thread of 105mm, this lens really isn't for the faint-hearted. And like I was saying, 105mm filter thread, very challenging to find either a UV protection filter or a circular polarizer filter or an ND filter. There are some out there, but they're gonna set you back a significant amount of money. It's also really heavy, 1.65 kilos for a prime lens. You're gonna really notice that if you're a wedding photographer on a really long photo shoot. And although it is cheaper than pretty much any other Canon lens like it, versus other Sigma lenses, you're paying a pretty penny for that 105mm at f1.4. If you're on a budget, that 85mm f1.4 is far better value for money, especially secondhand. So overall, after using this lens on quite a few photo shoots and quite a few weddings, what do I think of it? Image quality wise, absolutely amazing. The images I got from this lens truly are exceptional. I loved this lens when it comes to the overall image quality. Really sharp, love the colors, and that background separation is just not achievable with pretty much any other lens. The closest I can compare this lens to is the very recent Canon RF 85mm f1.2 DS, and that's got that special defocused smoothing element. But that lens there is £3,500. Over double the price of this lens here. So you can really see how good the image quality is versus the price point. But like I was saying at the start of the video, why do I say it's the best lens you should never own? And it's got to do with the size and weight. It is just challenging to hold, carry, use on any sort of wedding day. If you're maybe a studio photographer and it just sits on a tripod and all you do is click all day, then you've got to be really happy with the image quality. But if you're a travel photographer, if you're a landscape photographer, or me, a wedding photographer, or a portrait photographer that shoots outdoors and you've got to carry it in your bag, you're really going to notice it. And it's such a shame. I wish I wanted to carry this lens around with me, but it ended up being too big and too heavy. And by lunchtime, I put it in my bag and it ended up staying there. And sure, the image qualities are good, but if you don't bring it with you or you don't want to bring it with you, you end up with just normal photos. So if you're happy carrying this lens around with you, you really, really are going to love this lens. But for most people, including myself, I genuinely think it's the best lens you shouldn't own. And with an overall score of 36 out of 50, this is a recommended lens to have in your camera bag. But of course, write down in the comments below, what do you guys think? Do you really like this lens? Do you wish you owned it? Or are you someone like me that has owned it and ended up selling it? Make sure to write it down in the comments below. I've been James for Photo Fever, and I'll catch you guys next time.